Hello, watchers and listeners in Internet land, and welcome to another author interview plunge. We are continuing our April month of mayhem with terrorist novelist Norm Brewer. Norm is the author of Blending In, A Tale of Homegrown Terrorism. Prior to writing Blending In, Norm was an award-winning journalist, editor, and worked with the Transportation Security Administration in the Department of Homeland Security. So we'll be asking Norm how that background fits in with his storytelling. Let me read you from the very beginning of Blending In. Without warning, the rocket-propelled grenade fell just short of the press conference getting underway near the gates of the Russian embassy. Shrapnel ripped into the shoulder-to-shoulder reporters and cameramen and onto the two men standing at the podium. Cries rang out and shredded bodies flew. Russia's ambassador was killed instantly. The U.S. Secretary of State went down with multiple wounds. On the opposite side of 2650 Wisconsin Avenue Northwest, a wiry man in a tan trench coat had just limped down a side street, away from the heavy black gates, when the RPG struck. "Damn, I said not a go!" the spotter screamed into his phone. He quickly composed himself, taking in what he could see through the dust and debris. Okay, one notch up, one notch left. After the briefest pause, a zip-like flight and instantaneous explosion again pierced the air as a second grenade hit the diplomats and media. "Dead on, fire again," ordered the spotter. Behind him, he heard a man shouting in his ear, "You son of a bitch, you're part of this!" I'm going to warn you now, folks, Norm looks like Jesse Ventura on steroids. It's not pretty, so be prepared. Everyone, please, big round of applause. Please welcome Norm Brewer. Wait a minute, Norm, you don't look a thing like Jesse Ventura on steroids. You look like my grandfather. But that's the whole point of Blending In, isn't it?
It is. The main characters in the book, Stickman and Maple, are white guys. They're in their 30s. They have fairly conventional jobs. Maple is a blue-collar worker. Stickman is a computer geek. They're able to float in and out of jobs, taking them for a period of time, saving their money, and then wreaking mayhem in some part of the country.
Well, okay. So you're supposed to look like a grandfather and not just, thank you, by the way. Thank you for putting up with my little hoax there and taking part in this. How did you come up with the idea for Blending In?
I had noticed at some point in 2014 when I was looking for a writing or editing project that most of the people committing mass killings in this country seemed to be social misfits. They often were not well prepared when they made their attacks. They often had not thought about their escape. In a few cases, they were prepared for martyrdom. The question arose, what if you had a couple well-trained terrorists who were disciplined, who did plan, who were not interested in martyrdom, who were prepared to abort a mission to escape so they could attack again? The answer that occurred was that the outcomes, that is the carnage, would probably be far worse than what we had been experiencing, even with these horrendous mass killings around the country.
You know, I got to tell you, listening to that description, if you change just a few words, you're talking about newbie writers who want to become best-selling authors. They're totally unprepared. They would rather run than fight. And you have the very few, I guess, in any discipline, who really work at it, who persevere, who know what's required. So I guess what you're saying is, and I'm not comfortable actually thinking of it this way, that based on your research, the best terrorists are really no better than top level sports people, top level actors, top level authors, top level in anything. They put time into learning their craft.
Well, I certainly think they do. I don't think we have seen very many of them to date,
Good.
particularly domestic terrorists, and that is great. But I believe blending in is a cautionary tale that at some point, people with evil intent who hate this government or Americans are going to take the time to plan a much more serious attack than we have seen so far. And I think we probably, well, I'm sure we need to be doing more to prevent that.
I think your writing, what I've seen of it, is great, and I hope your book is not a cookbook, as they say. But I do have to ask, based on that concept of how accurate is your book, how realistic is blending in the overall plot, particulars of how it unfolds? Could it serve, do you think, as a plan?
I don't think it serves as a detailed plan that would be of much help to terrorists. The Al-Qaeda and ISIS, they have information out there on the internet. There are many sources of that could be used for putting together an attack. So I don't have that particular concern. Also, this is a first book, first novel. There are a lot of terrorism authors out there who have had wonderful success, of course, in terms of book sales.
Yes.
And, so I certainly don't think I'm having any particular influence.
Okay. But do remember, it's those little known works that I've seen those conspiracy movies. Okay, all right. You've been an award-winning reporter and editor who has worked with the Des Moines Register and Tribune and for Gannett News Service in Washington, D.C. Does blending in make use of your reporting style? Did you write the books more with a journalistic flavor than a fictional narrative flavor? What was that like? Because your journalism background has got to play a part.
Oh, I think it did. And I did not consciously address that question as I wrote the book. But I think the style is, relatively brief sentences moving rather quickly from one development to the next, which is basically what you have to do to meet space limitations in news. And also the sense of trying to involve the reader as directly as I could, as opposed to spinning a flowery or extended narrative on just a tiny slice of what the book's about. I tried to keep it moving quite quickly, and I think that does reflect my journalistic background.
I'm sure. Now, you've also worked as Director of Employee Communications at the Transportation Security Administration and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. I don't think I could put any larger, more big words in that sentence. Does that background contribute to your story?
In a general sense, it did. There's nothing top secret or SSI in this book. As Director of Communications, I was not employee communications. I was not on the front line. I was not chasing bad guys. But in that role, I did experience or work with a lot of different issues. And so I think I became generally familiar with a lot of the problems facing people on the national security front. I certainly would not claim to be an expert on any of those issues, but the exposure was definitely good.
Excellent. Now, you have, I don't want to give away any spoilers here, you have an elderly couple playing a prominent role in blending in. Number one, the terrorists rent a mobile home from this elderly couple. Number two, the husband is suffering from Alzheimer's. And I you know, my hat's off to you. You play this for both its poignancy and for the subtle humor that can be in those situations. I have to ask, is this based on your family experience? And not only is it based on your family experience, if it is, was writing that kind of stuff cathartic, cleansing, gratifying? Were you able to help yourself understand the situation? Do you believe it'll help others in similar situations?
I really can't judge how much it will help others, except perhaps to humanize Alzheimer's and dementia for people who have not had experience with it. If you'd permit me, Joseph, here's the book, and I wonder if I could read just a short passage.
Please, go for it.
2 or 3 paragraphs that I think go part way to answering your question. In this chapter, Stickman is taking the rent to Wilbur and Violet Banks, the elderly couple, and is greeted at the door by Wilbur, who then says, "One good thing is we finally get to spend a little time with you. You know, you look a lot like that movie star we see on the TV." "Really? Which one is that?" Stickman tried to keep his tone nonchalant. "His name escapes me, but I see him every once in a while. By the way, how's your vacuuming going?" A confused Stickman was rescued by Violet. "You don't have to answer that," she said firmly. "Wilbur, you really shouldn't ask people you barely know such personal questions." Stickman caught on. "No problem, sir. I don't mind. Actually, it's going quite well. How about yours?" "I quit the vacuum. Violet's in charge of it now. I finally decided anyone who has a presidential award could quit the vacuum." The presidential award and, of course, the vacuuming are part of Wilbur's Alzheimer's. I was sitting with my aunt, who at that point was over 90, one afternoon, and we were talking about going to lunch or something, and out of the blue she says, "How's your vacuuming going?" And it took me a minute to realize that she was serious, that there was something clicking there that was real to her. I don't remember my response. It never became an issue, and the question came up another time or two. Besides Aunt Odie, there was my mother and a dear friend who was a brilliant man and a terrific reporter, both of whom suffered different forms of dementia. So I drew on the experiences we had with those 3 people in creating situations involving Wilbur's dementia in the book. Another friend told me that when I started to write the book, you can't have too many bullets in a thriller. He's a very smart man, but I rejected his advice. I think that as a reader, there are times when I like the action in a thriller to slow down a little bit, give me a little respite. And Wilbur and Violet provide an opportunity for me to, as you say, inject some humor, some humanity, some contemplation, hopefully without disrupting the flow of the book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. You told me previously that you were raised on a farm, and then your family, you were just mentioning your aunt, your family is very long-lived. Your dad's 98 years old. How strong a role do family values play in blending in?
You know, I don't believe I consciously thought of that as I wrote the book. Certainly, military service, not part of my background, was a part of my father's and most of his 5 brothers. So those kinds of cultural values that are so opposed to the theme of terrorism were part of what I think was in the back of my mind as I wrote about these guys and the consequences of their terrible actions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I want to go back to your background in journalism and as a director of communications. You mentioned employee communications at the TSA. What did you find most useful in learning to write? You've been writing for a while. You've had what I consider a diversified career in writing. Were there people who, like you just said, there's a friend, a very smart friend, who said, don't put too many bullets in. What did you find most useful in your lifetime, in your careers, learning to write? And the other side is, what did you find least useful in learning to write?
Well, perhaps most useful was learning to read, or at least appreciating reading. My mother certainly encouraged me to read. I read everything I could get my hands on from about age 6. And then in high school, I had a lit English teacher who sort of broadened my reading to what would be considered good literature, from the more juvenile stuff that I probably pretty naturally pursued. Along the way, I had a couple of editors who I think contributed a lot to teaching me to write. And one of them taught me to write as hard as the facts would allow, which I think lends itself well to this kind of a novel. In doing so, I wondered at times if I was realistic, to go back to something you brought up earlier. And it's been encouraging that I've had 4 people, 3 from the military and 1 from law enforcement that I know of, who have read the book, and they all find it realistic.
Wow.
So I've been very encouraged about that.
Yeah.
It was frankly something that worried me just a little bit. Because,
Yeah.
you know, you start getting into fairly complex information involving weaponry and explosives and police techniques as far as tracking down license plates and use of surveillance cameras and stuff like that. And you just, as a first-time writer of fiction, you're not sure how well that's coming together. And the answer is probably still out there, but at least for 4 readers from the field, it is encouraging.
Yeah, that's high praise. So I'm going to switch it up here a little bit. Do you have other books? Is this going to be a series blending in volume 2 with other terrorism? Do you have a hero who's going to be like the blending in foe? He knows how people blend in. He's going to go find them or something?
So I
And if I've
mentioned,
given you ideas, I get 10%. I'll tell you that right now.
okay, fair
Just
enough.
kidding. Just kidding.
As mentioned, this is my first book. I haven't committed myself to doing another. Uh, if I do, I think another book about terrorism would be of interest. There are all kinds of soft spots
Hmm.
in our security defenses. A lot of soft targets out there that, and of course, I just barely scratch
Yeah.
that surface in one book. So there's certainly room to do another book. I have started doing some research, so I suppose
All right.
I'm headed in that direction, but I haven't
Hooray.
committed to it.
Good. Do you remember Tom Clancy never thought about anything beyond Red October? That was going to be it. He was going to go back to being an insurance salesman. So hang
Yeah,
in there. Get it
yeah.
done. Okay. All right. Let's go back now. What is your favorite part of blending in?
I haven't thought about that. I would say at one point, and I don't want to give away too much about the book, but at one point I make an effort to get into the minds of one terrorist in particular, and that was a very interesting exercise. I looked at some of the other interviews that you've done, and I think there was a question, something along the lines of, if you could have lunch with a character, who would it be?
Yeah.
If I could do that, I would sit down with Maple. And the reason is that I tried to press the writing in looking at Maple's motivations and reactions. I tried to press that, and at some point, the writing started to sort of disintegrate.
Mm-hmm.
I could only press it so far. And then I actually had to back up and remove some stuff, and edit it and make it a little bit more simple. And I'm not sure how much sense this makes, but if I could sit down and have lunch, I'd try to get Maple to tell me how to go beyond where I went.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. I'm not sure I want to ask the next question. How do you enjoy spending your time when you're not writing? Now, don't tell me you're creating bombs or speed assembling assault weapons in your basement. Okay, just what else would there be?
Yeah.
You're having lunch with terrorists. Okay, what else do you do for fun?
Oh, we walk, I swim, enjoy reading. Judy and I do quite a bit of travel. We were in Cuba in January. That was a very eye-opening kind of experience. And I'm in my 6th year of retirement, and so I have time to get downtown Washington, D.C. to the mall about weekly, and do museums, whatever, and spend quite a bit of time with family. As you mentioned, my father's 98, and he still lives at home on his farm, and so I get out there every couple months for about 10 days and sort of help in whatever way I can.
You mentioned that you do a lot of reading. What types of books do you read?
Usually not thrillers. I like to read biography and history. Marvin Kalb has a new book out called The Year I Was Peter the Great, about his first year in Russia
Yeah.
as attaché
Mm-hmm.
in 1956, which was the year that Khrushchev started rewriting Stalin's positive history and tearing him down, which caused a huge uproar. And that's it's really a fun read. I'd recommend that. But every few weeks, I do like to pick up an action book of some sort or some other fiction to provide a break from biography and history.
Okay, so you mentioned Marvin Kalb, biography, history. Who or what are your top writing influences? Your favorite books, obviously Marvin Kalb. When I Was Peter the Great, I'm going to need to look that one up. Who are your authors? Who are your go-tos?
You know, I've only read one of Walter Isaacson's books, and that was the one on Steve Jobs. But I found that to be just a terrific book. I was very sad to see when Pat Conroy died a year or so ago. He left behind a great body of work. I think over the years I've probably enjoyed his writings more than anyone's.
I agree.
Sara Gruen, Water for Elephants, and Ape House, I think I think she's a terrific writer. And there are, of course, several historians that can entertain in any number of ways.
Okay, excellent. I know many of the names you mentioned, and I agree they are phenomenally gifted writers. There some of the books you mentioned are on my bookshelf as well. I got one more question for you, and before I get to it, I want to thank you for your time. This has been wonderful. I've learned a great deal. I've learned, if nothing else, that terrorists don't look like Jesse Ventura, which is probably a good thing. So, one more question, sir. What question do you wish that someone would ask about you or your book, but nobody has?
Joseph, I do not have an answer.
Okay.
You know, I've been asked a variety of questions, of course, and I again saw that on an earlier interview that you did, and I thought about it, and I came up blank. There you go. But okay. I thank you very much for having me on.
I'm gonna push myself. I'm gonna go one more question, because you were a reporter and an editor of the Des Moines paper, which at its time I believe was a journal of record in the Midwest. So I forgive my ego. How's my interviewing style?
It's good.
Thank you.
Good. You might be a little bit tougher.
Really? Oh.
No, I'm kidding. You asked very good questions. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I was an editor in Des Moines for a time. I certainly was not the editor.
Okay, well, there you go. That's the journalist in you coming out with make sure the facts are correct. Thank you so much, sir. I appreciate this. Blending In is the novel. The full title is Blending In, A Tale of Homegrown Terrorism. Norm Brewer. His book is on Amazon, and I'm hoping that we see more books, because as I read to you folks from the very beginning, it's a fast-moving, and a lot of things blow up, which means it's probably got Hollywood written all over it.
We can hope.
Yes. Thank you again, sir. I appreciate your time.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.